All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, and for the next 2 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 o'clock p.m. until midnight Eastern, right here from the Broadcast Centre and Studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, on Classic 1220 and streamed around the world on classic1220.ca. Now, if you have any questions that you would like to send me, if you have an idea for a guest, or if you'd like to share a story with us, my email address is xzone@classic1220.ca. My first guest tonight, X Zone Nation, is Mason Winfield, and we're going to be talking to Mason about the paranormal and supernatural folklore. Joining me now from East Aurora, New York, not that far away from St. Catharines, so we're neighbors. He's on the south side of the Niagara River. I am on the north side. Joining me now is Mason Winfield. Mason, welcome to the X Zone.
Thanks so much, Rob. Nice to be here.
Mason, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you fell into the paranormal and supernatural folklore industry, business, questionable.
I get that question a lot, and I usually tell them, you know, all kids love spooks.
Yep.
Why didn't I grow up? You know, but my decision to focus on the paranormal professionally was pretty much a professional decision. You know, I was an English teacher. I loved the teaching. I had my objections to administrators, was looking for kind of a new career.
Right.
And when you're not 22 anymore, you kind of fall out of the program.
Yeah.
Yeah. You really, because we really had these stages. So I figured, I'd go back, get a PhD, study Shakespeare, study Yeats, study James Joyce. I mean, I was interested in a lot of things. Then the TV is on, and there's the X-Files. And it's like, duh, the public loves this stuff.
Yeah.
And something else, you don't need a PhD. There's like no qualifications. You go to a party and you try to hit on a chick or something. Hey, I'm a doctor. Oh, what's your specialty? Tell her you're a lawyer. Oh, where'd you get your degree? Tell her you're a ghost guy. Everybody just goes, cool. Yeah, really.
It's true. Yeah.
The public is fascinated by it, but I'm being very flippant. I've tried to be a good researcher. I tried to think out of the box and follow the research, and there really is research on these subjects, and it's not much like TV in my experience.
That is true, because I've been doing this show now for 34 years, and it is nothing, absolutely nothing like it is on TV.
Yeah, the public gets almost all of its impressions about supernatural and paranormal stuff from entertainment.
Yes.
And because of that, they can be rather easily manipulated, or some of them can be manipulated. And, I just would never, claim to know something I don't, so.
Listen, let me ask you this. It's a very basic question. What were some of your biggest surprises when you started a study of the paranormal?
I should probably make a top 10 list of those and turn it into a lecture. I think I should. Well, one of them was that the type of ghosts that the eyewitnesses describe it's really different from those of entertainment. I mean, most of the ghosts that eyewitnesses described they saw, the ghosts don't look intelligent. They don't look like they know what they're doing, like most of them. Most of them look like they're just kind of a time loop or something, just there's some visual effect in the natural world that preserves images of things that once transpired there. But that's not all of them. But the typical sight ghost that the eyewitness reports, it doesn't look intelligent. It doesn't look like it's very good evidence of life after death. But then there is that small percentage. In my experience, it's maybe 1%. And they're very easy to tell. When you're interviewing somebody that's seen one of those, it's very easy to tell the difference between that and the average haunted house ghost. And there is a percentage of apparitions that really kind of do look like they suggest another level of existence. Another thing I discovered that was really shocking. I mean, I literally do have a top 10. One of them was that supernatural experience tends to vary culturally. And that really shocked me. Because you're thinking, hey, a ghost's a ghost, a UFO's a UFO, a Bigfoot's a Bigfoot, and and with a lot of it, yes, it is. It doesn't matter the ethnicity of the witness. But when it comes to a lot of other types of apparitions, particularly communication from the dead and regional folklore, the heritage of the witness really can matter. It's like, Italian people, Buffalo, where I live, the Buffalo area, it's not really a melting pot. It's sort of a quilt. And it's, really, it's starting to melt. But until about 50 years ago, Buffalo's ethnicities largely lived in communities. And the Italian Americans had their own distinctive folklore. The Polish did. The Germans did. Now, the Germans were a lot more spread out. So in other words, and the Native American stuff, when I started to get exposed to that, I realized, wow, the Six Nations, the Seneca, the Tuscarora, the other four, this was radically different from the type of supernatural experience that white people were having. And, so I think I gave you 3 big ones right there.
You sure did. I've seen this myself where for example, the Irish. Oh, my good Lord. If you want to talk about ghost hauntings, leprechauns, the spirits of the forest and so on, talk to the Irish.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. Which brings me to one of my 4th on the list is, the Celtic folklore and supernatural experience is very interesting to me. It was sort of a side specialty. But when I started my serious study of the supernatural / paranormal, because they are different subjects, I really thought there was a firm line between aspects of folklore, old written stuff, legends of the uneducated, just, what I mean by folklore.
Sure.
I thought there'd be a massive difference between that and anything that a living person would think they experienced. And I discovered, I never thought I would ever meet a human being who would seriously say they saw a fairy. And I've encountered it. It's like, they don't use the word fairy, but very often, but yet
they use wee people, they use garden fairies, they use leprechauns. Sure.
Well, the Irish do, yeah, but the typical eyewitness that I get, they may not be Irish, and they say they've seen fairies.
Yeah.
And very often they don't say, oh, I saw a fairy. They describe what they saw in very guarded terms. And some of the time, they didn't even mention the size. And you know, when I interview people, I, you know, try to get every detail possible. And every once in a while, I'll get a kind of a clue that something they're describing is supernaturally small. And I go, okay, well, how big was it? They go, oh, hey, yeah, it was only like so and so high. And then you'd realize what they'd seen was a very diminutive, either an apparition or a supernatural being. And it took me a long time to try to process. I mean, I think if I saw a very small supernatural being, the first thing I mentioned was, oh, it was only a foot tall. But never having seen one of those, I don't know what it would be like. But some of the witnesses don't mention the size at first. And I've started wondering, why wouldn't that be the first thing they'd mention? Why would you have to draw that out? But I think I've got it figured out. We're living in a society in which we have a lot of small things. You know, I like this, you know, this cup of tea I've got here is about 4 inches high. So we've got lots of small things, but we don't have many supernatural ones. So when you have a supernatural experience, it can be so shocking that that's the thing that impresses itself on the witness. But it's taken me a long time to wrap my thinking around that phenomenon.
You were talking about size of these sightings, you know. Can we attribute the size to what the person has read prior to allegedly having an experience, or what they believe culturally this wee folk should look like? How do we gauge that, or how do we quantify or qualify what the person is actually claiming to what they've actually seen?
Yeah, I think that's a very intelligent question. It's the one any scientist would ask, and my answer would be, you know, there isn't.
Yeah.
You know, we're in the X zone. You know, we're in the zone of perceived human experience.
Oh, no, please keep on using the X zone. I love it when a guest does that.
I'll see. I'll make a note. I'll write it down on my clipboard here.
Listen, Mason, you and I have to take our first commercial break. Please stand by. Exonation, our guest this hour is Mason Winfield. His website is, are you ready, Exonation? Pencil and papers in hand. It is masonwinfield.com. MASONWINFIELD.com. And when we come back, we're going to be talking more about the paranormal and supernatural folklore. This is the X-Zone. I'm Rob McConnell. You're listening to us from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. And we're with you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until midnight. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. So here we go. We're going to take our break. And just for Mason, we're going to play the X-Files theme.
All around old Cape Horn, ships of the line, ships of the morn. Some who wish they'd never been born, they are the ghosts of Cape Horn. All around.
Welcome back to the X-Zone. I'm Rob McConnell. You're listening to us on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, and streamed around the world on classic1220.ca. Mason Winfield is our guest this hour, and his website is masonwinfield.com. Before we go any further, Mason, have you yourself ever had a paranormal experience?
I believe I have, yeah.
Could you share it with us?
Well, sure. I think I've seen 3 ghosts in my life. And by that I mean an apparition. The best, you know, sometimes I hesitate to use the word ghost quite frequently because there's a lot of baggage on it. I mean an apparition. And I've seen 3, I believe I have, and they were all different. One was 3 human forms it was an evening at a crossroads. It was in a country, you know, I was driving. And there was like a T crossroads. And the T cross is all in folklore, it's considered the unholy cross because it's the T, you know, it's not a full crossroads is a Christian symbol. And a T is almost the bull's horns, the devil, you know. But at any rate, I was driving by this country crossroads, and there were three people standing under a street light, and they were not on the road, and they were kind of antic, you know. It's like they were posing, like King Tut, you know. They really were taking unusual body forms. And I drove by them, and I thought, they're a bunch of stoners, you know, a bunch of hippies. They're just trying to freak out the lone traveler. But I gave, 5 seconds later, I hit the brakes, turn around, scan the field with my headlights. There's nothing there. And the only explanation was that it was an apparition. Another one was about 15 years ago. I was visiting one of my best friends from high school. He and his wife were living up in New Hampshire. And they had a big condominium, and I was staying downstairs on a couch. 4 a.m, get up to hit the men's room. And there's this cat there. It's like a tortoise cat, you know, and it's right there on the lawn, right there on the rug, looking at an empty chair. And I made a detour to go around it. And I'm looking at myself in the mirror about 2 minutes later, and I go, wait a minute, these people don't have a cat. And in the morning, I said, what was that? And they go, well, what the image you described is our dear late cat, passed away 2 years ago, and you know. And so I'm pretty sure I saw an apparition that time. Then the third one was, it was about 5 days after my beloved grandmother passed away, and she was 99. There was nothing to be mourning about in a way, because she had had a great, comfortable, long life.
Right.
But you know, I was a wreck. And about a couple days after she passed away, I woke up in the middle of the night to find this crazy light form in the room of my apartment. And I turned the light on and off a bunch of times just to make sure I'm awake. You know, I was really seeing it. I could see it with the light on, I could see it with the light off, and then it gradually faded. But it had a very unusual shape. And as the apparition faded, I mean, I probably saw it for quite a few seconds. And as it faded, it had a very unusual, kind of a stubby profile. And I realized that was the outline, that light form was the outline of my grandmother on her walker.
Oh, my goodness.
I know. And I never saw anything of her again. No messages, no nothing. But it was just exactly like her. Just check in, say, I'm okay. Don't worry about me. I'll catch you on the upside. But just make sure you live a good life, you know?
They're the kind of stories I love to hear. Because I believe that those on the other side can make their presence known to let their loved ones that they've left behind, that they're okay, that they need not grieve, that they will once again meet up on the other side. Why, in your opinion, Mason, is it that you can have a group of 30 people, they go on one of these ghost walks or ghost tours, one in particular to our Fort George over here in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and about 60% of the group will have a paranormal experience of one kind or another. Maybe it's a tap of somebody. Maybe they see something through the corner of their eye. Maybe they see an apparition. Whatever it is, they see something. And 40% of the people see nothing, hear nothing, feel nothing.
Yeah. Well, you know, I hate to rain on anyone's parade, but I would have to say that psychic phenomena, in my experience, is not reliable. I mean, in my life, and I'm a hard-minded observer, I think I've seen 3 apparitions.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Why do they see them why does anybody see them every night when they go to Fort George? And I love the War of 1812. I love that. I love that stuff. But I think, frankly, people's imaginations get cooking.
Yeah.
And psychic phenomena is just not reliable. And that's reason one why the scientific establishment does not believe in psychic phenomena, because it doesn't behave like a lab rat. It doesn't behave like mathematics, like chemistry. You cannot count on it behaving in a certain way. So they say it doesn't exist. Well, meanwhile, everybody else sees it. But if there was a predictability about psychic phenomena, I think many scientific people would believe in it. And it's just one of those things that there isn't a predictability about. So I would have to say, if 60% of the people that go to Fort George think they see something supernatural, their imaginations, much of the time, are probably overactive.
Now, I'm going to prove that you are 100% right. And this is how. People who go to Fort George, take the tour, and have a paranormal experience are imagining things, and this is why. Because people within the paranormal community say that it's the soul, the essence, the image that is embedded in the fort. Okay? And yet, what very few people know, and I got myself into a bit of trouble with this, because I actually did research on the fort. And the fort where it is today is not where it was during the war.
Correct.
So how can you use the paranormal framework that everyone seems to be using to, say, well, yeah, I had the experience. Well, how did you have the experience when you weren't in the real fort or where the fort was during the war?
Yeah, well, yes. And I don't mean to sound like I don't believe in psychic phenomena or that I'm ridiculing people, because I do believe in psychic phenomena and I want to be respectful.
That's the key word.
I try to be. I'm not telling you Fort George isn't haunted. I think it probably would be, even if it is a recreated fort that's been moved, because you think about the generations of people who have spent time there. Sure, maybe it wasn't the War of 1812, but we've got a lot of ghosts that appear legitimate that didn't have anything to do with a wartime trauma. Maybe it's a ghost of somebody from 1900. So, in other words, the new fort could just as likely be haunted as the old one. It just isn't going to be the same source.
But the people who see the ghosts in the fort describe the apparitions in, War of 1812 uniforms.
Yeah.
So, I believe that a lot of the sightings are what the people believe that they will be seeing if, in fact, they do see or experience the paranormal. Now, I'm not saying that psychic phenomena is poo-poo, because I've had so many guests on, credible people who have reported and talked about their psychic experience. I've had many of guests on the show who are professional psychics who have hit things dead on. Now, on the other side of the coin, I have had those on the show who, by the end of the interview, I say, oh, no, this one's out to lunch for sure. There was the lady who brought a psychic goat into the studio one day. And how the goat predicted was very simple. She had a green bowl with goat treats and a red bowl with goat treats. She would ask the goat a question, and if the goat went to one, it was a yes, one bowl, and if she went to the other bowl after being asked a question, it was the answer, that correlated with that goat. Now, I just shook my head, and I did learn something very, very valuable Never bring a goat into a radio studio. Never.
That does seem like it could have unwanted complications.
Oh, it did. It did.
So I meet people who say some unusual things to me, but I really try to listen to them for a long time. And but I personally, you're a better man than I am, Rob, because I do a little bit of podcasting myself, and I would have probably not had that person on my program. And if I had, I'm not sure I'd be the same gentleman you are. So, you know.
Well, it comes with experience.
Well done.
You and I have to take our break at the bottom of the hour. Please stand by. And Exo Nation, our guest this hour is Mason Winfield. His website is www.masonwinfield.com. We're talking about the paranormal, supernatural folklore. And when we come back, I'd like to touch on UFOs because everybody's talking about UFOs these days, especially after the congressional hearings. And I don't know. It's funny because after the congressional hearings, UFO sightings throughout MUFON and everywhere else are way down.
Is that right?
Yeah. Stand by. We'll be back on the other side of this break as the XO continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in beautiful St. Catharines, Ontario, on Classic 1220 and around the world, classic1220.ca.
Can't trap on Windy Mountain because the white ghost travels there. Some say that it's a Yeti, Snow White's the color of its hair. Just like the dinosaurs, you should have died off long.
We're talking about the supernatural, folklore. We're talking about the paranormal with our guest this hour, Mason Winfield. His website is masonwinfield.com. Mason, what is your take on the UFO phenomenon?
Well, I'm going to start by confessing that I feel it is the weakest of my capacities in the paranormal realm.
And why would that be, sir?
Well, I think part of it is that I just haven't been as interested in it as some of the other paranormal areas, but also the UFO business is vast. It's something that has really caught the public imagination a lot more than some of the other paranormal areas. And in other words, there's so much out there that's being said and written and conjectured,
right,
that it's almost a full-time job to be doing it, and I'm not. But it doesn't, when has that stopped me before? I do have a few opinions. One of them is, I think a lot of things that are reported as UFOs may not be extraterrestrial. And I'm not saying that they're not paranormal. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying that they may not be from another star system. You know, back in the 60s, I mean, the UFO stuff, I mean, never forget that the UFO craze got kicked off on June 24th, 1947. Now, June 24th is that classic sighting of like 7 UFOs out in the West Coast, you know, and I mean, the one that kicked it all off.
Sure, Kenneth Arnold.
Sure. Well, do you happen to know what June 24th is?
Yeah, in Quebec, it's Saint Jean-Baptiste holiday.
Well, yes, that's right. And it is basically Midsummer's Day. It's a very old power day. And the Freemasons, it is the big day to the Freemasons. So in other words, there's a little bit of a suggestion of code connected with those manifestations. And I wouldn't be the only one to suspect, that there could be a message there. In the 60s, though, the UFO thing got really going. And there are two British researchers, John Michell and Paul Devereux, and they're both heroes of mine. And regrettably, John Michell has passed away. I just missed sharing a stage with him at a lecture once. But both Michell and Devereux, they're older guys than I am, but they started out their careers trying to figure out the UFO thing in England, and they weren't, and in Europe, and they weren't getting anywhere. There was nothing they could come up with. And they took two different directions. Michell decided to plot out where people were standing in England or France or Germany or whatever when they saw UFOs. And he discovered something very interesting, that where the individual was standing or where they said they saw the UFO, there was overwhelmingly a connection to ancient sacred sites like Stonehenge or
Right.
Like an old burial mound or a stone circle or something. It was like the witnesses were either standing on one or the UFO appeared to have a relationship with one.
Weren't they the two researchers who also made a connection between ley lines and UFO sightings?
Well, I know Paul Devereux did it. Well, they both were exposed to lays. I mean, John Michell wrote New View over Atlantis. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't at all be surprised. I would think particularly a lay crossing would be a source of. I mean, you get a lot of hauntings at a lay cross. But Devereux sort of went a little bit, and Devereux's still with us, magnificent scholar. And the paranormal kind of gets looked down upon in some areas, but when you get a truly outstanding scholar in the paranormal, this person is a large mind. They just didn't focus on a mainstream topic. But Devereux decided to go and back interview eyewitnesses to UFOs. And what he started to realize was what they were reporting wasn't these lights in the stratosphere shooting across the sky. A lot of them were talking about light forms at night that were much lower to the ground. And the reason everybody thought they were talking about flying saucers is because of the reporter who interviewed them. That was what the reporter thought. And the reporter of whatever article, the journalist, didn't really, they were thinking they're going to be these flying saucers, and they didn't realize that the individuals were discussing a much more terrestrial phenomenon. And Paul Devereux came along and wrote a book called Earth Lights.
Right.
And he conjectures that a lot of what people have reported over the years as potentially extraterrestrial beings could be productions of the Earth. And they still could be paranormal because they've got such a connection with ancient sacred religious sites.
And another reason why they're connected to the paranormal is because we don't know for a fact what causes them. There's another theory that it's the grinding of tectonic plates that cause the earth lights.
Well, yes, Devereux had three categories of earth lights. One of them was definitely what he called EQLs, earthquake lights. And, incidentally, if anybody wants to come up with a top 10 list of things that used to be paranormal and now they're normal, earthquake lights. I mean, if you told somebody about crazy life forms not far from the surface of the earth shortly preceding an earthquake, a lot of people would have looked at you like you'd said you'd been riding on a UFO and playing canasta and having herb tea with Elvis and Bigfoot. And
Oh,
you'd have
you heard that show.
Yeah, you'd have been laughed out of the room. But earth lights have been documented, earthquake lights. And furthermore, like ball lightning, I mean, that used to be considered paranormal. And now they caught it on film. Now they accept ball lightning. Marsh gas, that they thought was crazy. Now they accept that. So, you're right on to something there, yes. And if a researcher doesn't interview the witness closely enough, I can't take any responsibility for what they end up writing about it,
I get that. But why do you think in today's society, when information is so accessible, thank God for the internet, thank God for Google, and because if you want to do research, you can do it if you know where to get the credible research information that you need. So having said that, why do you believe that there are UFO conspiracies and conspiracies on other aspects of not only the paranormal, but everyday life?
Well, yeah. Good question. First of all, I've done some research into conspiracy theory, and I do know that the UFO thing does overlap into conspiracy theory.
Oh, big time, yeah.
I'm going to go with Jacques Vallée, the great French researcher who's still with us. He said, whatever's behind this phenomenon is a lot smarter than we are. So I think the big question with UFOs is if they don't want us to see them, why can we? And if they don't want to talk to us, why do we see them? But I think I'm not responding directly to your question. And I was entertaining myself with my own wisdom, and I sort of forgot your original question. Can you please refresh me, Rob?
Yeah. Why do you think that there is a connection between UFOs and conspiracies? And why are conspiracy theories so popular these days when information, real information, is accessible on the internet if you know where to look?
Well, I'm not so sure I wouldn't agree that. I'm not specifically thinking of UFOs, but just American politics. I mean, it's like they can talk the public into believing anything. It's just a joke. Does nobody think for themselves anymore? Does nobody do any research? Nobody digs? So the idea that a government could conceal or conspire with extraterrestrials and hide it or persuade people to believe whatever they wanted, that doesn't shock me. And with extraterrestrial intelligence, it wouldn't shock me if the extraterrestrials, they're so beyond us, not only in technology, but probably spiritual evolution. They don't want to corrupt us. It's like, the UN is trying to protect the world's few remaining indigenous people. They don't want anyone contacting them, anyone touching them, anyone talking to them. They don't want that. And I think the ETs would be trying to protect us. And if but there might be different communities of them too. And it's possible that there's some kind of espionage going on, within the ET community. There could be different population groups. And some of them communicate with the United States, and some of them try to pull strings in China. Now, why they wouldn't just do what they wanted with us anyway, other than this kind of a humanitarian protection of a lesser species, I just can't figure there's anything the Earth has they want.
Yeah, I agree, because, if we use the non-interference clause that people talk about, like when you were watching Star Trek, they couldn't interfere with the evolution of a society. We are not that evolved. Why would an intelligent species want to visit this planet and put themselves at risk of our insecurities, oh my God, we don't know what it is, let's shoot it down.
Or not only that, why do they need to come here?
Well, let's discuss that on the other side of this break. Exo Nation, Mason Winfield is our special guest, and we'll be back as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, on Classic 1220 and around the world on classic1220.ca. Tell me, Exo Nation, are you a believer or skeptic? Send me an email, xzone@classic1220.ca. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.
Closing time. Open all the doors and let you out into the world.
And welcome back, everyone. Mason Winfield is our special guest this hour. And first of all, Mason, thanks very much for joining us. I'd love to have you back on because there's so many different topics that you have researched over the years. I'd love to get you on so we could discuss them more.
Well, this is a really fun discussion. I'm well matched by my interviewing host.
Thank you, sir. We were talking about UFOs. My question is, if they are out there, why don't they just land on the front of the White House lawn or up in Ottawa in front of the Parliament buildings or, at the Kremlin? Why don't they just do something that is nice? Why don't they help us with the world hunger, the world climate control? Well, you hear them that, people believe that they're back engineering crashed vehicles, that the UFOs and their occupants have landed or been shot down. And of course, nobody can give you any proof of that whatsoever. Yeah, it's like, why don't they just say, "Hi, gang, we're here"?
Well, you're touching on, and this is not my strongest field in the paranormal, the UFO stuff, but you're touching on so many really interesting speculations. Let me go back to a story. I can't use any names.
Okay,
but let's put it like this. I'm not only a researcher, but I'm also a fiction writer, and I attend conferences now and then with other authors. And a friend of mine, who's a pretty prominent horror author, was called to a meeting shortly after the 9/11 disaster. He and maybe 10 other prominent horror authors, whose names a couple names I can't give you. And they were greeted by some members of the military, and they handed them each one of them a pencil and a legal pad and said, "We're going to leave you guys alone for half an hour. And we want you to think of crazy ways of attacking the United States. Because you guys are the fiction people. You think of this stuff. We can't."
Now, this was prior to 9/11 or after 9/11?
Oh, just after.
Okay.
But before that, my friend had been led on a tour of a military museum. And they had some amazing artifacts in a Vietnam era display. And they were things you did not know people had in the Vietnam era. You would think that our military wouldn't have had them until 10 years ago. What I'm getting at is there's a lot of advanced technology that we, the general public, do not know about. And it's entirely possible that a lot of the UFOs people see are ours.
Yeah.
So that's one theory for some of them. But as for the behavior of the extraterrestrials, as why they would or wouldn't do something, there isn't anybody who's got less information than I do. I go back to Jacques Vallée. Their methods are their own. But I will tell you this. You're familiar with the concept of Project Blue Book and
sure.
Dr. Alan
Definitely.
Hynek.
Yeah.
Well, Hynek, I really respect him as a scholar because he started out shortly after World War II being asked to analyze the UFO phenomenon, and he was a total skeptic. He didn't believe in any of it. Well, and then towards the end, he changed his mind. And it takes a really good scholar to do that. And he sort of came up with a conclusion at the end. One of our big problems in the way the extraterrestrial vehicles move, I mean, presuming they are extraterrestrial craft.
Right.
One of the problems is the way they move. What is the power source? What's the direction? All that kind of stuff. And towards the end, Dr. Hynek sort of came to the conclusion that it's possible that the directing force of these craft might have been something related to human extrasensory abilities. Might have been a psychic force. And you know that during the Cold War, this would have been something else really interesting to talk about, but during the Cold War between the U.S. and Russia, both the CIA and the KGB engaged in psychic experiments with human beings, try to figure out, can we weaponize human extrasensory abilities?
Sure, then that's where the movie The Manchurian Candidate came from, and where remote viewing came from as well.
For some reason the U.S. fixated on remote viewing. That's what they decided to do. I think the Russians were trying to weaponize psychokinesis, and but there has been studies of human extrasensory abilities, and I think the ultimate conclusion that the researchers of both sides reached was, yes, extrasensory abilities in people and animals do exist. No, they're not reliable enough to turn into information sources or
propulsion
military weapons. Yeah, I mean, if you're giving me a SAT test or and I don't get 1 out of 5 right, over the course of the big picture, there's something wrong. But when that's a fixed response test. But when somebody's making a prediction about a free response, I mean, the potential is almost infinite. So if that person is getting 10% right, that's really, really impressive. It doesn't help you much in a war. You need to be a lot righter than 10%, but yet when the chances are like 0.0001% that they're going to be right and they're 10%, it demonstrates the existence of something that we just can't perfect yet,
Now, you were starting to tell us about these people, these writers that you knew that met with the military shortly after 9/11, and we never finished on that. What happened?
I'm sorry. I must have gotten distracted.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was they sat around and gave their best ideas for how to an out-of-the-box attack on the U.S. But the real story, as far as a paranormalist might be concerned, is that trip to the museum where they saw all this technology that looked cutting edge for, 2012, whenever they were there, but was actually, at that point, maybe 45 years old. It revealed that the American military has stuff that would blow your mind.
But when it comes to that, the advanced weaponry that the U.S. and our allies have, does the public need to know this? Because the way I look at it, if the public gets to know what the military has, then our enemies are going to find out what we have.
No, you're right about that. No, I wasn't arguing. I get it when people have to have secrets. It comes in very handy to me when I interview many of the people I interview. So I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it, the fact that they might have aircraft that would look like UFOs to people, and they just have seen a test, you know. So I think that was my point in
I gotcha.
bringing that up. So a certain percentage of the UFOs people report probably are not paranormal, and they're not extraterrestrial either. They're ours.
I'd like you to tell me a little bit. We've got about 2.5 minutes. Tell me about the Spirit Way Project.
The Spirit Way Project is a research organization that's still kind of free form, but it's a group of friends and colleagues of different disciplines that I've put together to study aspects of the supernatural and paranormal. And we're sort of a contrast. You know, TV ghost hunting, you know, it's like you get a psychic who claims they can feel things and talk to the dead, and I'm sure some of the time they can. And then you get a bunch of guys running around in the dark with cameras, and that is the scientific balance to the psychic. And really, Spirit Way Project is kind of a rebellion against that, because there are other ways of looking at a haunted house. And we represent many different venues of human experience and expertise. And I got some really good scholars working with me. And we have a great feng shui expert, and we do work with a ghost hunting team. And these are smart people. They're good friends. We do have a couple of psychics, but we've also got Native American people. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if you're trying to study anything on the North American continent and you don't have the insight of the Native Americans, the First Nations people, you better start over. Because there is tradition about these things among the First Nation people. And they may not be living on the land, but their teachers, their elders may remember something about it. I mean, that's just a kind of a shorthand definition for Spirit Way Project.
We've come to the time when I have to say so long to you, but before we go, let our listeners know how they can find out about you and how they can get involved in any of the projects that you're working on.
Yeah, they should probably contact me at my website, masonwinfield.com. They could message me on Facebook. I don't friend everybody, but I communicate. No, I got hacked about a year ago.
Oh my gosh.
I just can't. Yeah, I know. I just can't be friends with everybody. I'd like to, but they could message me on Facebook, ask a question, go to my website, contact me through masonwinfield.com. We'd put them on the newsletter. They could keep in touch with Spirit Way Project's endeavors, and we'd have some fun.
All right, Mason, thank you so much for joining us. Great pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to the next time you and I meet here in the X Zone. Until then, take care of yourself and keep the great work up.
Well, you too. You're a good scholar. Well done.
Thank you very much, sir. And X Zone Nation, if you'd like to contact Mason, visit www.masonwinfield.com. Well, that's it for this hour. I'll be back on the other side of a short couple of breaks as the X Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. You can visit us online at www.classic1220.ca or visit the X Zone fan page at X Zone on Radio Classic1220.ca. I'll be back on the other side of this break for another hour of people searching for answers but demanding the truth. Don't go away.